You're listening to the best of the Martha Zoller Show. You can hear the show live Monday through Friday from 9 to 11 on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN and streaming at accesswdun.com. You can find all things Martha Zoller at marthazoller.com. It is the Martha Zoller Show. We're here with Congressman Rich McCormick of the 6th District, one of the good guys. He's a veteran. He's an ER doc and a husband and father of a lot of kids. Welcome, Congressman. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Okay, so last night they released this border bill. My whole position is that under both President Trump and President Obama, they did 1,000 times better job controlling the border than President Biden has with the exact same laws that are on the books. I mean, not to say there doesn't need to be reform, but President Biden has the power to control the border right now. What are your thoughts? Obviously, I know you haven't read it yet because it just came out last night, but what are your thoughts on what we need to do?
I've said the exact same thing, is that if you're going to have any changes to the law other than being more strict, is going to be a compromise in the wrong direction. Matter of fact, it's not even a compromise, it's a giving ground. I said this from the very beginning. We have the same laws right now for a sovereign border that Obama had. Obama deported a ton of people. He had very few cross the border. And all of a sudden, you have a president who, his vice president, who has the same laws, has a massive problem because of the way he's not enforcing, because he's encouraged people to actually come across the border, because he's breaking the law, in my opinion. The whole Remain in Mexico thing is a law. Still exists. You can't claim asylum by coming across 3 other countries to get away from your country and then say, I'm going to just end up in the United States. And the fact that we're actually processing people, letting people stay here on our dime, sending people on airplanes, is becoming normal. Like we're accepting that that's just how it is, that you can stay in schools, you can stay in airports, you can be transported all over the United States on the American payer's tax dollar to the tune of an entire congressional district every 3 months now. That's ridiculous. That should be scary to people. They cannot work. They cannot pay taxes. They only consume. They're like locusts. And the amount of drugs and crime and horrible things that are coming across the border with child trafficking, it's insane that we even allow this. It's out of control.
It's 21st century slavery is what it is, and it's happening on our watch. And I heard something really interesting that I hadn't thought about before, where border security is national security and is separate from immigration policy. And I know that the two are intertwined, but it makes sense to me, because having a secure border is what you need to have a secure country. And then immigration policy should be layered on top of that. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think this is what this fight is about. And the funny thing is, you have the federal government step in and say, "Oh, Texas, you can't protect the border. That's a federal issue." But then they have another state who says, "We're going to outlaw guns," and that's okay. They're picking winners and losers, and this is what I hate about the federal government, is that they're not even-handed. Whoever's in charge gets going to pick who wins. And this is just not the way our government was supposed to be to begin with. There are certain inalienable rights that are set up by the Constitution, and we have a sovereign border that's supposed to be supported and defended by the president and everybody else working for the government.
Do you have any hope that anything's going to get done this year? Because it seems like we're already in this election mode, and while I don't want to see Biden win any more than anybody else, but I am an American before I am a Republican or a conservative or a partisan. And I'm worried, Rich, about what's not going to get accomplished this year because we're fighting about politics.
This is the thing that we keep on saying, though. Everything's tied to H.R. 2, which is what codifies the laws that we've always had. And I don't. This is why I keep on voting against the CRs. I'm like, attach H.R. 2, dare them to turn it down, because it's overwhelmingly popular amongst the American public. At least 70%, probably closer to 80%, want a sovereign border without this crime, without this child trafficking, without the fentanyl, without the overwhelming number of people coming here who are going to be without anything of means, every single piece of food they eat, all their shelter, all their medicine, all their education, everybody who's born here will all come out of your pocket. And we've had 13 congressional districts worth of people cross the border since Joe Biden has been president. And they've been disseminated through the United States. We are at a breaking point. Should have never been done. We need to start deportation right now, or we're going to have a catastrophe. I mean, we're already having a catastrophe.
Well, I mean, I saw a number that there have been 1.5 million deportations adjudicated since Joe Biden took office. That means they went through the legal process. It's been determined they're supposed to be deported, and he's not deporting them. You know, so this guy has no respect for the rule of law. Now, I want to shift gears for just 1 second, where you were supporting Ron DeSantis until he got out of the race, and we talked about that on a number of occasions. But now you are supporting former President Trump. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, the whole reason I supported DeSantis to begin with is I thought he was the one guy who took the budget seriously, who took the debt more seriously than most. And I think the one criticism I had of Trump is that during his presidency, when we controlled the Senate, when we controlled the House, we had $1 trillion deficit during one of the best economies we've ever had in the United States. That means we're not taking it seriously. Now, you can have a great economy, and we're going to have a great economy this year, by the way. They're going to probably have a prime rate cut. We're going to have booming job market. We're going to have an economy that looks great, but we're heading towards a cliff because this debt ratio, this debt to GDP ratio is so out of control. We're one of the worst nations in the world. We shouldn't be that way. We have a spending addiction. We have a problem. If we don't get it under control, it will crash the economy. How? When you have that much debt, you get downgraded as a money currency standard, and we are the currency standard of the world. Since we went to Bretton Woods back in the late 60s, early 70s, we became the gold standard of world currency. Now, we know we have a competitor with BRIC. We have cryptocurrency out there. And if we continue to move away from a United States-controlled market or as a currency, we're going to be in trouble. And it's going to downgrade. It's going to make our currency more expensive to borrow against. And the Federal Reserve is going to break us. We're paying more in interest than we do on our military budget right now.
So we've got about 40 seconds left. And I'm glad you mentioned about the spending, because that was my one biggest concern about former President Trump, is he didn't ever talk about spending much. He's a real estate guy, so he likes leverage. Do you feel comfortable that he's going to be more responsible in that arena?
I hope so. I hope the representative body, the Congress, takes it more seriously, regardless of who's president. But my concern still continues to be that it's very easy to be president and have a great economy and feel good at the time. But if you're not preparing for the future, if you're not being visionary, we're going to have a problem for our children and our grandchildren, and this country will fall away as the world-leading power. And we have to watch over this. We have to be good stewards of the blessings that we have to live here in this amazing country.
Rich McCormick, I appreciate so much your honesty. You're willing to give this service, because there's a lot of other things that you could be doing. And I appreciate you very much. Thanks for being with us today.
Always a pleasure, Martha. You have a blessed day.
It's where North Georgia comes to talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
It is the Martha Zoller Show, and joining me right now is my good friend, Col Jim Lechnew. He's retired from the United States Army, but I don't know if he's really retired. Anyway, he has written a book that we've talked about before, but it's just one of those things that we need to talk about again, called With My Sheild. But he's also been very involved in Ukraine, so we wanted to have him back on again. Jim, welcome back to the program.
Hey, good morning, Martha. It's always honored to be here and good to talk to you.
So tell us about With My Sheild.
So we rolled the book out in October, which was the 30th anniversary of Task Force Ranger in the battle in Mogadishu. And I was really glad to get it out there, not just to tell my own story, but with the passage of time, there's been a bunch of misconceptions and some myths that came up surrounding the battle. So I was able to do a bunch of research. I'm also a history professor at Liberty, so I was able to use some of that skill to do some research and uncover some never-before-published facts about the battle. So it was really a good experience getting it out there and being able to tell that story again, because there's so many people that actually don't know that story in in spite of the fact there was the movie Black Hawk Down and things like that. So,
what do you think is the biggest misconception? Because it really was the start of a lot of events that we're still dealing with today. And I guess the modern start of events we're dealing with today. What's the biggest misconception?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I don't know if it's a misconception, but one of the little understood facts is that Al-Qaeda was deeply involved, and I actually call it the first battle against Al-Qaeda. At the time, Osama bin Laden, before he went to Afghanistan and hatched the 9/11 plot, was operating in the Sudan, just to the north of Somalia. Very close ties between Al-Qaeda and Aidid's forces that we fought in Somalia. In fact, there was training that went on. There was Al-Qaeda advisors on the ground during the battle, and I'm convinced it was actually Al-Qaeda terrorists who operated some of the weapons that shot down some of the helicopters. So the connection with Al-Qaeda, the fact that it was the first battle against Al-Qaeda, and both sides, I think, learned a lot from that battle.
And what are the lessons we need to keep learning? I mean, because it seems like I think that one of our biggest assets and our biggest problems is that we are a positive, forward-looking people. And so because of that, we tend to think we've solved problems and that we never have to deal with them again. But what we see is, whether it's what happened on October 7th or what's happened multiple times since Somalia, we continue to have these issues. What do we need to do?
Yeah, absolutely, Martha. Those are some great points. You know, it was a Democratic administration during Somalia under President Bill Clinton, and they tried to approach this from a very restrained manner. Let's do the minimum amount we can. In my view, some incompetent aspects of their policy, and you're seeing the same type of thing from the Biden administration. Incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan, incompetent approach to all these security issues. And again, in my view, President Trump took the absolute right approach to national security and to foreign policy. Is no one wants to go to war. I mean, we're tired of decades and decades of war. We don't want to be proponents of that, but you absolutely avoid war by strength. And one military strike against Soleimani deterred Iran during President Trump's administration. But back to the Somalia lesson, one of the lessons they learned was, if you can inflict casualties on the U.S., they're going to back down, or they're not going to be in for the long haul. And that's exactly what President Biden is demonstrating now in the Middle East. And you see things just falling apart with these incompetent half measures. Nobody wants to commit troops on the ground. But if you're going to go in militarily, you have to go in as the strongest dog in the fight. And they're just showing nothing but negligence and incompetence like we experienced in 93.
So what do you, when getting back to your book, what do you want the message to be? And then let's get an update on Ukraine, because I think people are not talking about it.
Yeah, the message that there's a number of themes to the book. Again, this was the early 90s. The military that we see today is vastly different. And I've served with lots of diverse types of people and different people. You know, some of the best soldiers I've served with happen to be female, et cetera. But back in the 90s, it was a different military. And so it was a group of men that fought together in a brotherhood on the ground. And you just can't achieve that the way the military approaches diversity now. And it's got nothing to do with cultural things. It's about, in many cases, it's purely about biology. And so that's kind of one of the themes. Is back in the 90s, it was a brotherhood that fought together. We were trained somewhat, in some cases, what society sees brutally, but there's a reason for that. The whole Spartan theme of how that task force was trained and the reasons for that, and how that manifests itself coming together in combat against overwhelming odds, and prove the time that those things that's how you win wars. That's how you train men to fight wars, and that's how you win. And you see an extremely different approach by the Pentagon today, and I hate to say, I think that's manifesting itself on the battlefield. So to tell that story, heroism of the guys that fought on the ground that day and in the air, the helicopter pilots included, that was really my reason for writing the book.
Well, and I appreciate that you do that, and I appreciate your continued service, because we have this situation where there are some complaints here in the United States where we haven't had accountability for the money that we've sent to Ukraine. But also there is this, if we're going to be committed, we need to be committed. So you've been to Ukraine a number of times. Give us an update as well as what we need to do now.
Yeah, Martha. So I like to say, Somalia was my first war. I served in 5 different wars after that, and that's one of the reasons the Lord took me there. And if you read my book, it's far beyond coincidence. I mean, it was clearly, a destiny or a duty that the Lord had for me in Somalia. And one of the reasons for that was to go on and help continue and try to contribute to different situations in 5 different wars after that. And Ukraine is one of them. I've been there for almost 2 years. I came home just before the holidays to take a break, but I've served on nearly every battlefield in the war, either covering as media or assisting the Ukrainians. And one of the things that perplexes me is I understand the problems in this country. I mean, I'm extremely conservative, extremely concerned about the Marxism which is tearing this country apart. However, to compare our problems to defending Ukraine to me is like apples and a rock, not even apples and oranges. That's a democracy fighting against the Red Army. And you may not like all the aspects of the Zelensky government, but it was a legally elected government. There's no one in that country that disputes his election. Many people I know dispute President Biden's election. So to me, I just can't understand almost the hypocrisy or the irony of people that are critical of our support for Ukraine. A democracy fighting against the Red Army. Not a perfect system. Sure, there's corruption, but there's just as much corruption on our side, and certainly incompetence. I agree with people like Rand Paul that think there ought to be extreme oversight and supervision and support, but that's negligence on our part. That's the Biden administration just dumping things off on the Ukrainians and then wondering why there's no accountability. And I can tell you, it's like World War I with drones up at the front with the Ukrainians fighting against the Russians. And this isn't some sort of like territorial dispute or some sort of argument between some Slavic guys. This is Ukrainians fighting to defend their homes against the Red Army. And again, I just get extremely perplexed by people that are against fighting for Ukraine. I understand helping our country, but again, this is Poland in 1939, or this is any number of freedom situation against an invader of the Red Army. So I really would encourage people to look at it that way. And again, let's have accountability. Let's have as much oversight as we can. But the people that are administrating this on the U.S. side, they're the ones that brought you the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan. They brought you incompetence where they can't even keep the chain of command informed of their own status. I'm talking about Lloyd Austin. I mean, these are 1+1 mistakes from a history of people that have incompetence. And so I don't think, though, that Ukrainians are to blame for that.
Yeah, I think, I think that we have the big problem. And look, I said this when President Biden was elected and when he was running, is that I didn't have any problem with his domestic policy per se because we could work our way out of that. I mean, it's a difference of opinion. My problem with Joe Biden from the beginning was that his foreign policy, he had been wrong on every issue since he got into the Senate in 1975, including getting rid of Osama bin Laden and what you mentioned related to the Afghanistan withdrawal, and now the responses to the attacks on our soldiers and the deaths of our soldiers in the wake of October 7th. I mean, he just can't get it right. They're the gang that can't shoot straight. And it's dangerous. It's very dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. It's just demonstrated negligence and incompetence. Ukraine is just another aspect of that. While there are high publicized assets we provided, like the HIMARS and things like that, you still on the ground see that it's a half measure. They're not getting enough equipment. They're not getting enough ammunition. They're not getting it in a competent manner. And so a lot of that is on the U.S. and on the Western allies. And when you go to the big picture about why this is important, the Russians are watching this, the Iranians are watching this, but more importantly, the Chinese are watching this. And just like Somalia, where lessons were learned and drawn by the enemy, the Chinese are drawing lessons from this about our incompetence and our basic impotence in being able to respond to these things.
So, Jim Lechnew, how can they get your book?
It's available on Amazon. It's at Barnes & Noble and Target. It's an easy internet search with My Sheild. And I just encourage everybody to take a look at it again, to honor the guys that fought there. And then there's some lessons learned like we talked about today. So thank you, Martha.
Putting the talk in news talk. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
Andrew Clyde is here with me right now. He's the 9th District Congressman. He's one of the hardest working guys. His best asset is his creative and very talented wife. I'm sorry, Andrew. I do love your wife. She is just like one of the best people I know. But he works harder than almost anybody up there in Congress, and he's always going to tell you the truth. And I appreciate him being with me today. Andrew, welcome.
Well, good morning, Martha. Great to be with you. And thank you. I agree with you. Jennifer is much better than me.
She is the best part of you, and that's the way it should be. You know what I mean? I don't mean that in a negative way at all. I think that she is just, I just love being around her. But anyway, I don't know how you do what you do, and I know it's because you've got great support at home, because you are in the middle of this firestorm. And I don't know if you heard me before when you were on hold, but I want to know, we had supposedly the president proposed a border bill at the beginning of his term. I don't think it ever got voted on, but he had a Democratic Congress, a Democratic Senate, and he was a Democratic president. Then the House of Representatives put forward HR 2 and passed it when you guys took over, and it's never been taken up on the Senate. Now you've got this so-called compromise bill that, James Lankford is a very conservative guy. And this may have been the best deal he could have gotten in the Senate, but it's not a good deal for the American people. Why can't we get to conference, since there is legislation out there, and actually have a real negotiation instead of this behind closed doors, you can't see it till we're done with it kind of garbage that we have?
Well, Martha, I'll tell you that right now, just like what you had previously said, President Obama had the authority. President Trump certainly had the authority and used it very effectively. President Biden has all the authority that he needs to control the southern border and the northern border. He could right now, in statute, he could end catch and release. He could reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. He could end the parole abuses. He could detain inadmissible aliens. He could use expedited removal. He could rein in the benefits for illegal aliens. And he could, with presidential proclamation, he could suspend or restrict entry for every solitary illegal alien that tries to cross our border. But he refuses to. He doesn't want to. He wants all of those folks to come in to get on the government dole and to become new Democrat voters at some point in the future. That's the entire intent of the southern border. So he has the authority right now, but he refuses to use it, and he's actually violating the law. So the reason that we passed H.R. 2 was to increase the guardrails, to strengthen the guardrails, to make it more difficult for him to continue to violate the law. And that's why H.R. 2 is so necessary. But if he really wanted to, he could use every authority that he has to stop the invasion at the southern border.
And what concerns me, too, about the Senate bill is that it basically, if it were passed, and it's not going to be, but if it were passed, it would put in place, I'm going to use your word, guardrails, but they're not. What it would is destroy the ability of the next president to be able to control this situation. It is a worse situation than what we have instead of a better one.
So do you mean the Senate bill would do that?
The Senate bill.
Oh, absolutely. Fortunately, the Senate bill is dead on arrival.
Yes.
I mean, in fact, it's dead in the Senate right now. I think we'll see that today. But in fact, honestly, it was one of the most amazing takedowns of a bad piece of legislation I've ever seen. I commend the conservatives out there that reached out to their representatives and their representatives that stood strong. I mean, that's the way it should happen when you have bad legislation. And this was incredibly bad legislation. I mean, we could go through what it would have done, but it would have literally, validated or put into law the fact that 1.8 million illegal aliens could come every year, minimum every year, into our country.
And see, what I don't understand is that on the legal side, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the legal side. I think you and I would agree with that. But we allow 1.1 million people a year to come into this country legally, and that's more than the rest of the world combined. Now, why the lefties in this country, the progressives, so-called progressive in this country, somehow want to paint us as an anti-immigrant country. By no definition, are the laws of this country anti-immigrant. But we're not following the laws right now, Andrew. And what we have is our anarchy, not only at the border, but in major cities and everywhere across this country.
And you're absolutely correct, Martha. We have anarchy at our southern border, but it's anarchy by choice. You know, this is a self-inflicted wound by the current administration, and that's one of the reasons why. And Secretary Mayorkas is the point of the spear when it comes to the Biden administration policy on the southern border, and that's why it was so important to have the vote yesterday to impeach him. Now, the vote failed by literally one vote, all right? It was a tie. It was 215 to 215. But that's okay. We had one member, our current majority leader, Steve Scalise, was out on sick leave, recuperating. But he'll be back. He'll be back, I believe, next week. So I think what you'll see is we'll have another vote next week, and we'll pass this resolution, and it'll pass 216 to 215. And we will impeach Secretary Mayorkas for two things. One, failure to follow the law as written, basically violating the law. And number two, lying to Congress. Those are impeachable offenses, and those are absolutely rock-solid impeachable offenses. And that's why he needs to be made an example of and go to trial in the Senate.
So I want to ask you, I'm concerned about kind of what, and I know we don't want to get too much into politics, but it's hard to separate the politics from this situation. I'm concerned about kind of the disorganization of Republican parties across the country. We should have no trouble electing a lot of Republicans in this election this year, but we're making a lot of mistakes. Do you see it that way, or am I missing something?
Well, no, Martha, I don't necessarily see it that way. I see that there's certainly in the presidential arena, there's some infighting there, and I think that will after the next Super Tuesday, I think we'll see that will settle down, and we'll focus on literally taking back the Senate, taking back the White House, and maintaining the House and growing our majority in the House. This president and his policies have been a disaster for this country. The Senate has gone along with it, the Democrat-controlled Senate. So I think the country's seeing very, very clearly that the Democrat Party is taking us in the wrong direction. And, I mean, whether it's Americans dying from fentanyl, or whether it's the crime crisis that we're seeing, all of this, and the disaster of inflation, you name it, Martha, we are having crisis after crisis here in this country because of the policies of this administration. And the American people are not, they're smart, and they see it, and they realize that this must change, and a change in leadership will fix this issue.
Now, what are you working on right now yourself as far as legislation is concerned?
Well, I'll tell you, we are about to have a piece of legislation come forward. It passed through committee yesterday to redesignate, again, and this is a correction of a policy issue from the Biden administration. The Houthis are a terrorist organization, but they are not designated as such. President Biden, within his first month in office, eliminated the designation of the Houthis as a foreign terrorist organization and removed the sanctions from them, which allowed them to cause the disaster that they are causing in the Red Sea and in that area around there, attack commercial shipping, etc. So I have a piece of legislation that's coming forward that will come to the House floor, which will redesignate them as a foreign terrorist organization and reinstate sanctions, which is what President Trump did and President Biden undid, that we are going to, through legislation, have to redo. So that's the first piece. And then, of course, we're continuing to work on appropriations. That's my committee. And I was speaking last night to the chairman of those committees, of the different subcommittees, trying to make sure that our path toward a better financial future for America is what we're doing.
I know that you voted for the Israel funding yesterday. That's right, correct? Did I read that right?
No, that is not correct.
Okay.
I did not vote for that bill. And the reason I did not vote for it is because it was not paid for. We could have done that. We could have put on the floor a bill that paid, that was supporting Israel, but paid for. All right. I did that back in November when, Speaker Johnson put a stake in the ground and set a standard back in November. All supplementals will be paid for. And we did that by passing Israel support in a paid-for fashion, rescinding money that had been pre-approved or pre-authorized, pre-appropriated for the Internal Revenue Service. We can do exactly the same thing. There are billions and billions of dollars that have been advance appropriated that Pelosi did when she was the Speaker of the House that we can rescind. We don't have to borrow money, Martha, and we shouldn't be borrowing any money to do this.
It's local radio, and that's why you're listening. It's the Martha Zoller Show on AM 550 and FM 102.9 WDUN.
It is the Martha Zoller Show, and we're so happy to welcome back Lee Cohen. He's a columnist in The Spectator, The Sun, The Telegraph, Fox News. He's a fellow of the Bow Group, the Bouges Group, and the Danube Institute. So thank you so much, Lee, for being with us today.
Delighted to speak to you again, Martha.
You know, my husband's a two-time cancer survivor. He's 8 years now down the road. So I lost my mother, my sister, and my father to lung cancer. So, of course, when I heard the news earlier this week of King Charles's cancer diagnosis, I first thought, isn't this terrific that he's talking about it? Because it really does encourage people, and we've seen that not only in this country, but in the UK. People are calling, they're trying to get early screenings, they're doing all the things you should do. So I thought it was good. I thought it was different because generally the royals don't talk about their health situation. And then I thought about what would happen, with Prince Harry, and we saw kind of answers to all of that. Give us your initial thoughts, and then we'll get into the meat of this.
Well, yes, I think you make a very good point, sort of drawing a distinction. Traditionally, and when Queen Elizabeth and before her were on the throne, they didn't release very much information, and people really had to read between the lines. So King Charles is coming forward with this kind of transparency really is a watershed moment for the monarchy. He felt he had to do it so that there wouldn't be all kinds of speculation with what was going on, but also it had a noble purpose in that he wanted to raise awareness for his own subjects, that the importance of early screening for cancer and for diagnosis. So it really is a difference in that it's letting sort of more light in on very private matters that were handled differently before, but it's with a noble purpose.
And, it's kind of on the heels of the Princess of Wales being in the hospital for a very long stay. A 13, 14-day stay in a hospital in today's world is a long hospital stay. And they took a different tact. They said she was going in for abdominal surgery. They said how long she would be in, how long she'd be recuperating. But they've shared much less information than the king has.
That's right. And in fact, they didn't tell us about this until after she was recovering. This makes the point. The royal family are not private citizens like you and me whose medical issues are important to the public because they represent the country in a way that even our head of state doesn't. They are people who are emblematic of their country. And in that regard, their health and well-being is of concern to the public. But the flip side of that is that even though they occupy that status, which is different than just you and me, they are vulnerable to all of the mortal issues that we're all vulnerable to, and they're deserving of privacy, particularly in difficult medical circumstances. So this is a hard line to really balance, I think.
So we had, this kind of thing that's been going on for the last 4 years with the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. And Harry, came for the coronation, stayed 27 hours or whatever. He came to see his father and stayed one day. We still don't see Meghan Markle doing anything related to her family. So they're still kind of living on this island in California. Your thoughts on the visit and also on the quickness of him coming and then leaving?
Well, sure. And I've just written a piece for Fox News. It should be up on their site in a couple of days on exactly what you just asked. Harry's visit can be seen and has been seen by the public in cutting two ways. Either, and as anyone would hope, this was the sincere concern of a son who was confronting his, parents' mortality. And what would anybody do in that case, no matter where you lived? You would go to see that parent as soon as possible. And Harry is not constrained by, a lot of the financial issues that most people are. He can pick up and go at the drop of a hat, which is what he did. Now, a different take on this, and some would say it's cynical, but I wouldn't, because is that Harry was doing this to be in the spotlight for his own PR. And the reason I say that's not cynical is this is someone who has a history of selling out his family's private matters for personal gain. And he and his wife, as their sort of fall from grace in Hollywood has shown, they don't really have a lot that keeps them relevant and interesting other than Harry's ties to Harry's family. So if they're cut off from that, who knows if they're able to succeed on their own steam.
Well, and it's so interesting when you think about him. Everybody's making something about this short visit, but I think that the king had a schedule. He had some treatment. He wants to have, he wants to relax in a place that he's comfortable, and he's got the resources to be able to do that. And Harry's to the point where you can't trust the fact he won't share what you talk about, because that's what he's done in the last 3 or 4 years. And while the king is clearly been the guy who's leaving the door open, Prince William, I think his first priority is his own family, and they've been hurt by some of the things that have been said. And so he's not going to open that door again for a very long time.
Well, you're exactly right. I think this trip was a disaster for Harry because, look, you say the king had a schedule, et cetera. If your son is going to come over, take an 11-hour flight, you would think you could give them a little more time. But I'm not faulting the king. Harry and his wife have acted absolutely abominably to the royal family. They've said they're a racist family, creating terrible problems for them. They've shared their secrets. In Harry's book, Spare, he has insulted his father's wife, the now Queen Camilla, calling her a villain and an evil stepmother. They've insulted Kate. He's certainly insulted his brother William. To my way of thinking, these are irredeemable sins, and I don't blame the king at all, or Harry's brother, the Prince of Wales, who didn't give him any time at all, who didn't see him while he was there. I don't blame them at all. And another reason it was a disaster was, the royal family essentially evicted Harry and Meghan from the only residence that they had in the UK, and they were right to do so because they were fearful if Harry and Meghan came at will that they would be taking down every word that they heard to use in future media and publications to betray and attack the royal family. So I think this was a disaster for Harry. It did not put him in a good light, and I think the king and Harry's brother, the Prince of Wales, Prince William, treated him with exactly what he deserved.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting story to watch. The family has had a lot happen in the last 4 years between them leaving, the death of Prince Philip, the death of Queen Elizabeth, the coronation of the king. And I think by all accounts, Charles has done better than most people thought. I think he is his own man. People wondered if he was. He is his own man. He has, he's shown that he has the patience to wait, right, in many ways. And I think he has won the British people over and many people in the world. It's because yes.
I fully agree. I fully agree with that. And the Queen who, had a difficult reception at various points along the way before she was queen. I believe that she has also won over the world because she's got a very laid back, people friendly approach, and she makes the king happy. And what better characteristics could you want in a queen than that? And also, Charles has done a fantastic job his first year. He was filling very difficult shoes because Queen Elizabeth was universally loved the world over. People had an impression about Charles that he was this or that, and he's really stepped to the plate. He's proven himself as a great ambassador for the United Kingdom abroad, and he's earned the love and the respect of his people.
And it's funny when you think about Queen Elizabeth, there's a lot of people that like to say, oh, they were distant parents. They weren't good parents, all of that kind of stuff. And it was a different world they grew up in. But I think if you look at, the problems with Andrew notwithstanding, when you have a big family, you're going to have somebody that's got issues. But all in all, what you have is kind of people that are good adults. The 3 out of 4 are good adults and know how to act in the world. And that's pretty good parenting.
Well, that's pretty good parenting. And also, Martha, let's not forget, this is a tough job. This is not a job. You don't go home, put your feet up, and be done with your job. This is a 24-hour job. You're constantly under scrutiny. And, bravo for the king, who he's just received news that would devastate anyone, and he's still committed. While he's postponed some of his public appearances, he's still conducting his business. He's still meeting with the prime minister. He's still receiving the infamous red boxes that everybody knows about that contain the state papers. And he is showing that he is the worthy heir to the beloved queen that was known for working until the day before she died.
Lee Cohen, columnist with The Spectator, The Sun. He's got a new piece coming out on Fox News. He's also with the Bow Group and the Danube Institute. Thank you so much for being with us today. To hear the full versions of last week's Martha Zoller shows, go to the podcast page at accesswdun.com, and you can follow me on social media at Martha Zoller.